Hi, my apologies. You'd think after a year and a half of a pandemic, I'd have figured out the mute button by now. So welcome for real this time to the Sports Capital Symposium presented by Venue Ties. And I'm thrilled to introduce WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, who played under legendary coach Muffet McGraw in college, went on to a 33-year career at Deloitte, becoming the first female CEO of one of the big four firms, and then became WNBA Commissioner in summer 2019. And we would be thrilled to introduce her under normal circumstances, but she returned from a double overtime game in Connecticut last night. And so clearly the hardest question I will be asking all the session is, how did the Connecticut Sun actually lose?
Yeah, it was a great competitive double overtime game. You know, sometimes they had a double bye into the semifinals, and sometimes when you have that long rest versus a team coming off two single elimination games, winning like Chicago's, but it's going to be a great series. And the other series had a great game too between the Aces and Las Vegas Aces and the Phoenix Mercury. So I'm headed out to Vegas for tomorrow night's game.
Okay. Great. Well, the title of the session is how a people-first agenda is vital for success, and it's sort of a good place to start. Is what does that mean to you, people-first agenda, and how have you begun implementing that at the W?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So you mentioned my career at Deloitte, and I was kind of blessed to have this career of a firm that had an apprenticeship model that you had to develop your people and you had to have a diverse workforce because that's what you were hiring out of universities and MBA programs for. So, and when you're selling a brand like Deloitte, in that case, people first agenda was really important, especially we had 5 generations in the workplace from I'm one of the last years of the baby boomers to Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, Gen Z, digital natives like my kids now coming into the workforce. So that's why I called it a people first agenda. So when I came to the WNBA, and everyone thinks like sports is so different. I think the stakeholders are very different, but the business side is very similar. Sports is big business. Big business is about relationships. You have to have a simple strategy that's executable. And the first thing I needed to do when I came in was build trust with the players. So I called it a player first agenda. So not that difficult to bring people first to player first, because I was 4 days on the job, Joe, and I was asked to fly to Las Vegas to the WNBA All-Star game for a collective bargaining meeting. And I had never had a union workforce either. So it was really important to me as I listened that day to a 2-hour meeting with people I had no idea who they were. 4 days on the job. They were the players. The players have an executive committee of the Players Association. Lots of lawyers in the room are owners of the WNBA. And the one thing I realized, like usually in a negotiation, like you're on opposite sides of every issue. And what I realized is if you're going to run a very player first agenda, and these women, 80% women of color, you've got to really be committed to advancing their interest, advancing diversity, inclusion, and equity. And so we came up with a very progressive set of, enhancements, higher pay, tripled the top players' pay, looked at, family benefits. Some of these players are entrepreneurs. Some of these players, some of them are moms. And also programs to help them in their post-career. So all of that was about investing in something that originally you would say, well, that costs too much or we can't do that. But, when you're trying to build trust and you're trying to grow a league, and that's what we're trying to do and transform a league, you need that trust and that player first agenda first. And then you can get the harder things done that we're trying to get done now in marketing the league and the players.
Mm-hmm. And certainly the WNBA players have staked a well-earned reputation for being very progressive on a number of issues, particularly on social justice. And how do you certainly there was already some momentum, but I'd love to hear a little more detail about how do you continue fostering that inclusive workplace to make sure that every voice is heard in a way that advances an agenda, maybe a common ground, but also allowing for dissenting voices to be heard as well.
Right. And I can only imagine being a leader today in business is really difficult because I always had a philosophy when I was at Deloitte, like if you use your voice on every issue, you lose your voice. So you have to find the issues and topics that are really important to your workforce, to your talent. You have to show them that you're an authentic leader. So I think, obviously I deal a lot with Monumental, which I know is a sponsor of this program, and great owners of the WNBA's Washington Mystics. And so, we talk a lot with our ownership group about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure as our teams are hiring, whether it's head coaches, GMs, so front office, even back office, ticket sellers, and certainly at the league level, looking at building pipelines of diverse candidates so that you can feed that into the next generation of leaders. And I think our players are a great example of that. We just had Renee Montgomery step up, retired from the league, and then a few weeks later became a part owner in the Atlanta Dream as that ownership changed hands. So, I mean, a lot to unpack there, I think. But, it's an amazing time to be part of women's sports. And we obviously don't have enough, media coverage. We don't have enough corporate sponsorships. The players don't have enough individual endorsements, but we're making enormous progress. And this is because every company needs a platform about how they're driving their workforce around a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. And I will tell you, I'm a big believer by 2040, today's majority is going to be the minority and vice versa. So if you want to be in the talent game going forward, I think you've got to invest in diversity in your workforce in order to drive your business. And obviously, Joe, the data is unmistakable. And I actually wrote an opinion piece that quoted some of this data recently about the data, for diverse workforces is unmistakable around growth and innovation and collaboration, and the more diverse viewpoints that you have in a room representing, again, your broader workforce, the better a company performs.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the apprenticeship at Deloitte, and making sure that everyone is prepared for their next careers, and within the league office, how are you making sure that with this diverse workforce that maybe hadn't existed previously, how are you making sure they're set up to succeed in that development? I'd love to hear more of some of your thoughts at implementing that.
Yeah, one of the first things I want to comment on is well-being and mental health, and I'm sure you have a question on that too, is so important, especially coming off this pandemic. And because I'm sure, as many of you already know, millions of women left the workforce during COVID due to COVID itself, pay inequalities, caregiving responsibilities. And I saw a survey recently that 51% of women are less optimistic about their career prospects than before the pandemic. So, we at the WNBA sit at a very interesting intersection when it comes to, workplace equity and health, and because we check the box for employer, employee, media and entertainment company, public platform with a very diverse workforce. So, obviously I mentioned our diverse players, but we also know that our fans, so we have, 31 million fans who are 51% multicultural and 49% female, which, we skew younger, we skew more diverse, and we skew more women. So, I do think that as you think about the culture of development, whether it's in the league office, team office, players, first you have to tailor it. And I do think it's about culture, Joe. It's, and this is why when you're a new leader, you have to do some things, small, what I call small things of symbolic value to build trust so that you can get the harder things done, like culture change. And in my prior life, we called it a culture of courage. And we didn't define it because that could mean a culture of courage around diversity, equity, inclusion. It could mean a culture of courage around innovation or feeling entrepreneurial or raising your hand to take risks in your career. And then we put in these things called the 6 inclusive behaviors or leadership traits. And we all know we manage what we measure. That's the one thing I learned in a long business career. So educating and measuring on the traits that you're looking for in your culture. That is a huge, huge plus. And, just for those taking notes, I'll just rattle off because I still remember them from a couple of years ago when we put them in, because they're interesting to think about. 6 inclusive leadership traits for inclusive behavior. And we started to measure on these. One was courage. One was, I love this one, cognizance of bias. They all began with C's, by the way. One was curiosity. One was, and this was my favorite, cultural intelligence. And then one was collaborate and commitment. And commitment meant staying the course is really hard on culture change around inclusion, and moving the needle is hard too. I know at the WNBA, as I think about how we need to get more diverse coaches and GMs and staff and just building that pipeline. And you can't do it overnight. You have to build it over time, and you don't want to put people in positions where they're going to fail. So a lot of my career, I got put in positions where the firm did a good job of preparing me for that years and years before I eventually became the CEO. And I think that's what an apprenticeship model does. So I think we need to think more about how you instill that into the culture, how you manage it, because we know you manage what you measure. And then, what are the types of things you can do to build trust with the workforce so they trust that there's opportunity for everyone? Because as soon as you put policies in, those are exclusive and are excluding somebody. So, that's just a little pearl, hopefully, of wisdom to take away.
Sure. What was an example of one of those small gestures, those symbols early on to start building trust?
Yeah, well, I mean, I won in the WNBA and one at Deloitte. So when I took over at Deloitte, we needed some culture change. We needed to change some things where the can had been kicked down the road, call it, on some things. And so one of the things that is really small, and I actually got that small things of symbolic value from another CEO when I first started, who had been a CEO for 20 years, who said, Cathy, when you take over, do some small things and then you can get the bigger things done. And one of the small things I did, we had this travel policy that if a partner, and the partners are the owners in a business in a Big Four firm, if a partner had to change their travel arrangements, it required these levels of approval. And we were approving 99.9% of them, but it was taking time. Partners were at airports, they had to change flights. So took them out, just we call them bureaucracy busters, take them out, take these little aggravating things that really didn't mean a whole lot in the scheme of what you were trying to accomplish to grow the business and innovate, and take them out and build that trust so that when you have to get some harder things done, you can. And then at the WNBA, we're in collective bargaining, but the season's still going on and we have playoffs. And, unfortunately, we today don't have an economic model to support charter travel and some of the other things that men's leagues can, have been around 50 to 100 years longer than us. We're in our 25th season, by the way. And we're very proud of that, but we have a long way to go. And so I approved a charter travel when we were in the playoffs. It was a semifinal game where teams had to go from west to east with virtually no day rest. And I said, I want the highest performance on the court. So just that one little thing helped us build trust, that when we got to the core of collective bargaining, the players said, oh God, Cathy gets us. And then when we got into the pandemic, originally the players didn't want to play. But I hopefully, and my team, did such hard work to instill confidence in them because of the trust we had built throughout the back half of 2019 into the craziness of being in a bubble in 2020. So I'm still working on it. It's never done. The work is never done, but those are just two examples.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned the sort of the holistic well-being, and I assume that the bubble was probably the most intense example of trying to take care of everyone's physical and mental well-being. What kind of a challenge was that? And maybe what do you, in reflection, what was maybe something that worked particularly well?
Yeah, certainly the challenge of many of our lifetimes. And I had been through, a bunch of crises. I was actually around in the 80s for the S&L crisis, right in the middle of it. Y2K, which seems pretty easy now. The financial crisis of 07, 08, and now this global pandemic and the racial justice crisis in this country. So, first we always used to say, don't let a crisis go to waste. And also, crisis tends to amplify your weaknesses, but it's also a time to fix those issues and fix those problems. So, when we got into, when the NBA shut down in March of last year, the first thing I said is, well, we were supposed to have a live draft in New York and, bring all the college players after the Final Four of the women's side into New York. We were supposed to start the season in May because we're May to October. And so we're sitting here saying, okay, what is it? We thought maybe, this pandemic will be 2-3 weeks. We'll be out of the office and then we'll be back. So wrong. And so it was all about, I tell you, the number one thing, I never worked as hard as I did May into June of 2020 on scenario planning. And my team, who didn't have a lot of experience scenario planning, because most of them had never hit a crisis, was like, scenario what? And it was like, where are we going to be with or without fans? Would we do it regional, in arena, in one place, a single site, we were calling it at the time. We didn't like calling it a bubble originally. How would we pay for the testing and everything that was going to be associated with all the protocols? And they were enormously costly. So, working through all those scenarios and then being physically in the bubble, as you mentioned, was really hard for the players. And by the way, my staff and everybody, like people don't realize how much it takes back of house to put on a basketball season, especially in a bubble. And so IMG Academy, we're great partners. We had some great sponsors step up. The players, some of the things that were important to them were, making sure laundry got done. Think about it. I don't have to worry about that this year because they're back in their homes in their home markets. Obviously the every day testing, walking on eggshells every day. We had false positives. Would we cancel games? Would we cancel the season? Would there be a hurricane in Florida, believe it or not, because we were on the Gulf side of Florida in Bradenton, Florida. So much scenario planning, so much. And then obviously George Floyd, the racial justice crisis. I'm so proud of the players and what they stood for. And they had been doing that for a long time. But I think, and some people knew about Maya Moore taking off from basketball and working on criminal justice reform. But now millions know what the WNBA players stand for because we had that season and they were one of the only leagues where everyone was together in one place for a very competitive season that led to a normal playoffs, not with fans though. So it was hard. It was isolating for many of the players. Many of the players have talked about mental health. We had a documentary on ESPN called 144 because we have 144 players. So, again, we took that opportunity. We did a bunch of digital transformation to create second screen experiences for fans who couldn't be in arena. And so we worked hard at it and, it set us back on certain things like our mental health platform. We would have liked to have done a lot more, but, we were trying to build trust at the same time, put on a season in the middle of a pandemic. And it was multidimensional for these players. And I'm so proud that they not only survived it, but thrived in it. And ultimately, a lot of them established their personal brands. They became social justice activists. Some of them even social justice strategists, which are two different things. Civically engaged, like I don't think they've ever been before, and now have great platforms going into their futures, whether it's continuing inside the WNBA or outside.
Mm-hmm. And certainly the league, you're the standard bearer for vaccination rate. It's sort of talk about unity. How much did you and the league office play a role in that, or was that player driven?
Well, as soon as, like I came from the pharmaceutical industry, that was my industry at Deloitte. And as soon as we got through with the bubble, or even during the bubble, as the word about vaccines, the Pfizer, Moderna vaccines were starting to come out, it was definitely something that the union and I were talking about throughout the winter. We had surveyed our players maybe initially back in February, and some of them go to play overseas. About half of them said they were going to get vaccinated. So the union did a great job of doing a series of education with their chosen doctors. We had our doctors and our infectious disease specialists talk, to players as well. But the players did it. There were some probably things we did at the beginning of the season to restrict unvaccinated players. So that might have helped, like going to a hair salon, for instance, and things like that, which we know are important to them, but we couldn't risk them going with unvaccinated people. So the players stepped up and they really did an amazing job. Really proud of them. So that by essentially our season started mid-May, and by June 15th, we were a fully vaccinated league.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. And then you mentioned early on about how the business of sports in many ways is similar to other businesses, and given drawing on that, your prior experience, how mature is the WNBA business? And it does seem outwardly like there's a bit of an inflection point where you're certainly accelerating quite a bit. How do you keep building on that to get where you want to go?
Yeah, well, Joe, as I came into the league, I said the strategy is simple: player first, stakeholder success, which read in economic model and the questions you're asking, and then fan engagement. Those are our three pillars. And they sit on a foundation called the game and the quality of the game. If anybody watched the games last night, the quality of the game is so good. And I didn't necessarily know that coming into the league because I wasn't as close to it. I'd been to a Liberty game because I live in the New York area or two. But now, the quality of the game is so great. The brand is strong. Orange hoodie, logo woman, the rebrand. We're building some household names. We're building some rivalries. The organization, meaning team organizations and league, need transformation, need capability upgrade. And then the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is where it's hardest for me personally to think about changing it, because when I came in, the first stat that was given to me that less than 1% of all corporate sponsorship go to women's sports, and less than 5% of all media coverage covers women's sports. So as a good former CPA and business leader, I said, well, tell me, what's the denominator? Because if we didn't move that 1 in 5 to 5 in 10, or even 100 basis points, what's the denominator? And I literally said, we got to figure this out. And the denominator is huge because men's sports is such big business. So, and women's capture. So, we're on a path to, look at a whole digital transformation as we skew younger fans around our app, around our league pass, around WNBA.com. And I think we had a 108% increase in visits to WNBA.com this year. Our merch is up over 50%. Led by the orange hoodie, which last year was the top 10 SKU in the NBA store. First time in the history of the WNBA. We've had a record 135 million video views. So, there's so many metrics that you look at that can drive the business higher, because 80% of all household consumer purchasing decisions in the United States are made or influenced by a woman. So if you have a league that's followed more by women than other leagues, why wouldn't companies want to step up and support us? The diversity of our league needs to be part of our narrative, which it has become, but maybe wasn't before, and be proud of that. Our LGBTQ plus community, et cetera. So, so many things there to talk through, but ultimately the ecosystem's broken. The valuation model for women's franchises, media rights fees, patch on the uniform, placement on the court. It's all broken because it's based on decade-old metrics that are driven by spreadsheets that, never yield a favorable answer for women. And I know this from being in spreadsheets my whole life. And so we're trying to disrupt it. We're trying to transform it. And we've got to drive franchise value. We have to drive, media rights fees and other things. And so we're looking for help from the ecosystem on that. So anyone on this, call me, because we're going to disrupt things, and we're going to attack it in multiple dimensions. But we also need to be better at marketing our household, our stars into household names. You might have seen, Candace Parker, first time ever for a WNBA player, on the cover of 2K and the cover of Slam, and looking at Sue Bird in the CarMax commercial where the guy's with Steph Curry, and he's talking about 4 championships and X time All-Star, and Steph's like, oh no, I don't have all that, and he's like, well, I'm talking about Sue Bird, who's on the other side of the parking lot, and then Janae Agumike in DoorDash, and Sabrina Ionescu with Chris Paul in State Farm. So these are all signs and signals, Joe, of our growth. We're on our way up, but the challenge is getting the ecosystem to accept qualitative and quantitative statistics that are different from taking a men's model and discounting it, probably up to 80%, as I've figured that out with my background in financial instruments, et cetera. So again, lots to unpack there too, but really important that we disrupt it.
Sure. Well, not too long ago, I was putting on Prime Video to find something for my kids, and sure enough, right there at the top, Commissioner's Cup. And I think that's one of the more innovative partnerships that you've had. What have been the early returns, and what do you see, and what have you seen from the Amazon signal boost?
Yeah, so for the audience, first of all, back to Amazon first. So we signed Google as a WNBA change maker, which is our kind of premier platinum level of supporter. Google's been amazing, and Amazon Prime Video 16 game package in the same week. So I said it was a good week for the WNBA, 2 of the biggest market cap technology companies in the world signing with the W. So a very good week. But the Commissioner's Cup was a great first year whenever you're trying to stand up a new asset like Commissioner's Cup, a special in-season competition, so that we gave the front half of our regular season more meaning, more competitiveness. Players were playing for $500,000 prize pool because we promised to find other ways to compensate them versus the salary cap. So this was league funded. I think it was great, and now players understand it. The first year is always like they need to understand, why are we doing this? Will they actually get paid? I think Sue Bird, when she accepted the trophy from me at the final, Commissioner Cup final, was like, yeah, we're really getting $30,000 each. And if you think about that, our rookie salary, that's about little over a third of what a rookie would make that year. But, thankfully our max salary is up and our top players can make over $500,000. But still a lot of money for one game, but it was 10 games leading into that. We had the Olympic break this year. So that's always interesting to break for almost a month or a little over a month, but we restarted with the Commissioner Cup Championship, which Seattle won. And now it's interesting. Someone different's going to win the WNBA championship. So anyone that follows soccer in Europe, they have cup play and it gives opportunity for other teams to win versus, maybe winning the English Premier League or one La Liga or wherever else, Bundesliga. So this is important to us to build this into an asset. Amazon Prime Video streamed, and we think about our digital natives looking at the way they consume their content. So that was important. We did some innovation during the game with Connexon and wearables, and also with Hawkeye optical tracking technology, which gave us 50 million data points during that game. So all of that, trying to pilot what an in-season competition could look like and trying to throw some innovation in there as well, Joe.
Yeah, I actually wanted to follow up on the Connection and Hawkeye portion of it. What is the future of some of this player tracking data, both for the teams to use on the tactical side and player performance side, but also to use some of that perhaps to fuel some broadcast and sports betting engagement as well.
Yeah, I think it's the latter for us. If you're trying to grow a league, it's really important to provide that to teams and players about workload and stuff like that. But it's important also to integrate some of that data into broadcast to make it very interesting, and then integrate it into a second screen experience, which, there's nowhere you go. I was watching, baseball over the weekend. It's like everybody's on their phones. That's what I talk about, second screen. So, and that being a techie. So finding ways to engage fans differently. You see there's a lot of piloting going on different formats, whether it's Marvel, whether it's the NFL is doing some stuff with some cartoon. I forget what it is. So trying to engage kids, I assume, the Peyton Eli thing on the other ESPN channel. So, everybody's looking for different ways to engage fans in different formats. Obviously, we had 150 games on national platforms this year, and some of them were on Twitter and Facebook. Twitter, very different way of viewing one of our games. Prime Video, again, it was funny when our first game was on Prime Video, our fan feedback was, God, it looks so much better. It's better production quality. Well, it was actually the same production. They're just watching it on a smaller screen and maybe it looks better. So lots to think about there. But yeah, I'm proud of the innovation we've started here, but important to get it integrated into broadcast and getting fan feedback on, loop of fan feedback, production feedback, player feedback, league and team feedback to determine what works and what doesn't. Some of the stuff we'll throw out and some of the stuff we'll keep.
Mm-hmm. And at the All-Star game, I know you had the AT&T 5G game view, the augmented reality format, and you mentioned sort of, for the second screen, viewers and fans, how did that, particular implementation go, and what are maybe some of the things coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, this is something, again, I think with 5G technology, if we could get all of our arenas and all of our, this implemented more broadly, kind of the sky's the limit with, what you could do and what fans then can do. Again, integrating it into their digital experience and, kind of studying what other leagues are doing, and as we are, into our digital transformation, but also have a lot of work to do. And so AT&T is such a great partner of the league for many years now. So that AT&T Game View, with an AR experience using their 5G technology, as you mentioned, was, and they're also doing it for each game in the WNBA playoffs, and it's available in the WNBA app. So a way to drive in fans to our app, and then you capture data, because this is always the digital game is always a data game too, so if you can figure out how your fans are consuming their content, what do they want to see? Do they want bracket challenges? Do they want sports betting integrated? Do they want to do fantasy? Drawing in a bigger fan base for us is what it's all about. So, again, lots of opportunity there.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to a question from the audience. The new NBPA executive director, Tamika Tremaglio, also came from Deloitte. What qualities are crucial to leadership that you learned from your time there?
Yeah, so and Tamika in Washington, D.C., she led our I still say our because I was there so long. She led the Washington, D.C. practice for Deloitte in the metro area. Yeah, I mean, clearly Tamika's a lawyer and clearly has had a long career at Deloitte as well. And she is a great leader, and I'm sure Adam Silver, the NBA, look forward to working with her, as do I. And really the traits are, again, having a background in business. I believe she was working with the NBPA as well. So I think it's a great hire for the PA, and I'm sure, again, relationship building again is very key when you're representing the players and the Players Association, and as well as working with the league through, what the league has had to endure over the past year, 20 months has been enormous. And obviously with the platforms the NBA players have, and also CJ McCollum. So little known fact, CJ McCollum went to Lehigh, where I went. Only player, I think, from Lehigh ever to get drafted into the NBA. He's now the president of the Players Association. So kind of a cool, link for me to have a Deloitte person and a Lehigh person at the PA now.
Mm-hmm. And then I know the WNBA was one of the sort of the founding partners of the Big Fan Project, and you mentioned the demographic of 80% of decisions. What other the Fan Project, for those in the audience? Perhaps it's number one top line takeaway was how women's sports in particular are growing. What are some of the other key findings that you came away with from that report?
Yeah, it was great work. It's a great report. It's about the underinvestment and the undervaluation of women's sports. So it was a little bit what I was talking about earlier when I talked about the ecosystem being broken and the valuation model needing to be transformed. I thought that report really articulated well what the issue is. Coming off the NCAA controversy during March Madness last year, the women versus the men in the weight room controversy. This report gives us a good basis to use as an independent source to say, yeah, like we already knew women's sports was underinvested in and undervalued. But again, it provides some great, I think, narrative and framing for what we're trying to do is disrupt the valuation model so that, and there's other places you can looking for models that aren't only quantitative based on eyeballs. There's ESG and sustainability area where there's a lot of qualitative factors as well as quantitative going into company disclosures and the way companies are looking at evolving in the sustainability area. So we've got to look at all of this. And I think that report at least provides a nice narrative on, I think, what we already knew, but it's good to have all the data to support it, because in today's world, you have to make decisions as a leader that are very data driven. And I was always a data driven person because I used to say the facts will set you free, and data gives you facts in most cases, as long as it's accurate data and not skewed and is a statistically relevant population for data. So you've got to be careful, but I think that fan report was great.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, I would love to keep this going, but unfortunately we are out of time. So a virtual round of applause for WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. Thank you very much for joining us, and best of luck for the semifinals and finals.
Yes, thank you. Stay healthy, everyone. Take care. Thanks, Joe.